So first of all, welcome everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the June 2023 session of the Richmond Art Gallery's Artist Salon program. My name is Kathy Tycholis. I'm the Richmond Art Gallery's Public Education and Public Programs Coordinator. And on behalf of the Richmond Art Gallery Association, I would like to welcome you to this program that currently I am hosting in Vancouver, which is the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And I would just like to welcome all of you from wherever you are zooming in from or watching us from online. Welcome to tonight's program. In a few moments, I will introduce our guest artist presenter, Tracey-Mae Chambers, who will be sharing her current art project and some tips on how to travel your own art projects. But before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. So for those of you who might be new to the Artist Salon, this program is a monthly series of free talks by art professionals held on the last Wednesday of each month from February to November. The goal of the program is to offer visual artists a mix of professional development tips and advice, as well as ways to help strengthen and build up our artist community with interactive and in-person events, and to host topics of inspiration to artists to encourage you to keep on making your work. The Artist Salon also does exist as a private Facebook group, providing resources for artists, mainly in the Lower Mainland, with regular posts about artist calls, professional development, local arts events, and it's also a space for you if you would like to reach out to the community and share some of your arts events with one another. And you can find out about that on the Richmond Art Gallery's website at the Artist Salon page, and that's at richmondartgallery.org. I'd like to welcome everybody, and I would also like to welcome our guest artist who's staying up late tonight in Ontario for us on the West Coast, Tracey-Mae Chambers. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. So tonight, Tracey-Mae will do a visual presentation. She'll talk about her experiences of traveling her art project, following by questions from our audience. Just so you know a bit of background on Tracey-Mae, she was recommended by our arts and culture team here at the Richmond Cultural Centre. They worked with her on her current installation, which is actually right outside the art gallery doors in the Richmond Cultural Centre. And this is just one piece of her ongoing project, Hope and Healing Canada and Hope and Healing USA, which I will let Tracey-Mae talk about in more detail soon. So when I was seeking possible guests for the Artist Salon series, I thought her story of how she's been able to travel this project and the wide variety and different types of places that this project has been to and that you've installed your work in, I thought that would really offer a lot of insight to our Artist Salon audience of artists, both on how to make work that is socially meaningful and important to you as an artist, but also being able to share it with so many different communities and in so many different places all across the country. And while Tracey-Mae is based in Ontario, as I mentioned, I do think we can all learn from her as to what types of opportunities are out there for artists, or how to create those opportunities if they don't exist. Just so our audience get to know a little bit about our artist, I'm just going to do a very short bio before I let you take it away. So Tracey-Mae Chambers is a Métis installation artist and a member of the Métis Nation, Ontario. Her family is from the traditional Métis community in Sault Ste. Marie and Penetanguishene. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Tried. In Ontario. Okay. She is currently traveling Canada and the USA, creating site-specific art installations for her Hope and Healing project at residential school historical sites, cultural centers, museums, art galleries, and other public spaces across Canada and the USA. The goal of this current work is to broach the subject of decolonization with viewers and staff and to spark discussion. The stories from each participating venue will culminate in a book and a traveling exhibition. And you'll find out more about this project tonight, but also you can find out more at her website, which is traceymay.com. So I would rather let Tracey-Mae take over and talk about her work and share your experiences with us rather than me talking about it. So I am going to fade into the background. I will be monitoring your questions, so feel free to continue to add them into the Q&A. And then Tracey-Mae will do her presentation and I'll come back at the end and we'll get to your questions then. So you can take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Kathy, for asking me, and for the Richmond Art Gallery staff for recommending me. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to dive right into a PowerPoint. I hope that's okay. And we can sort of start from there and chat a bit about this project. Yeah, so I'm sharing a screen with you. This is actually the PowerPoint that I use for artist talks. And I wanted to use this in this presentation specifically because it actually touches upon all the points that Kathy was just talking about you know, how to make it, how to make something marketable or and how to market it to galleries and to museums and things like that, and have it, if it happens to be something that's like this that is socially conscious, how to speak about that. So yeah, I'm gonna just dive right in here. Okay, so I just want to move some things here. Sorry, one sec. There we go. So I started this project. It was really after Kamloops, after the unmarked graves were found in Kamloops, and I wasn't sure how to talk about that. I'm essentially a sculptor, and really I couldn't figure out a way to speak about that in a non-confrontational way through sculpture. Anything that I could think about sculpting was not going to be non-confrontational. So I sort of was finding myself lacking direction. I think certainly COVID was part of that, or the results of COVID, and of being sort of sequestered into our homes was part of that. So I was sort of at a loss. And then I figured out how I wanted to talk about this, and I was actually crocheting. I only know one stitch, one crochet, or I only knew one crochet stitch. And I was making a blanket for one of my sons. And as I was making it, I was thinking, and we were listening to the news and things like that. And I was thinking about how communities and families are this sewn connection together of people. And that was the start of the project. But then it became something that was about decolonization once I was looking at Kamloops and looking at residential schools and looking at truth and reconciliation, looking at missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And all of those things were happening at the same time. All of these sort of terrible things were happening in the news in the United States at the same time. Everything was incredibly negative at the time, and I'm sure we were all feeling that. But I decided that I needed to focus on one thing, and I focused on decolonization as part of that, as part of how I was feeling about all of this, and how to use these installations, or to use installation as a sort of a motivation to start conversation. So this is what you saw before here is all sort of a complicated way of how I sort of started to write things out about colonization and read about colonization and the differences between socioeconomic levels and within Canada, although sometimes we tend to ignore them. They are certainly there. And the power dynamics that occur within our culture. I chose red because it's the most powerful color in my mind anyways. Not my favorite color. Yellow is my favorite color, but I certainly couldn't use yellow for a project like this. So it was an important decision to make in what color of thread to use. Certainly used as a racial slur, but also it's a color of power and passion and anger and all of those powerful feelings that humans share, but also blood, which is something we all share as well. And I wanted to make that, wanted there to be able to point out the commonalities rather than the differences between us. So I started in my own space. So the photograph you see on the left-hand side is actually my apartment. I just want to point out that my husband is incredibly tall. So when he came home after a few days, this is what he came home to. And I felt terribly guilty for about 3 minutes, not for very long, because I was trying to sort out how I could use the thread, how I could use yarn to build something, to build structure from nothing. And I started by decolonizing my own space, by taking out everything that I didn't need, essentially, and only putting back the things that were important to me. And that's sort of how I started, literally how I started. I mean, at this point in time, we're not actually allowed to go anywhere or do anything. So I was only allowed to work in my parking garage and in my apartment. So that's where I started. So I think once you've got an idea and you realize that it's something that you're working towards something larger, you just sort of, there's a momentum to it. It starts as something small and then it just keeps building, sort of like these two installations. They're one of the first two that I completed. So what I did to start off this project, because of course I had nowhere to work, right? So I hadn't actually made any work aside from what was in my apartment. I'd made a few clandestine pieces in parks and things like that, which I got in some trouble for, but I was literally putting it up and taking it down. I just needed photographs. So what I did was contacted some of the small galleries that are in my area and just said, I need to be able to build something so that I can have photographs and be able to talk about decolonization, start a conversation about decolonization in these kinds of public spaces that tend to be less welcoming to marginalized groups. So I contacted a lot of places that were within my driving distance, like within a short distance. And a few of them allowed me to come and build an installation. Some of them I had to take it down the same day. Some of them I was able to leave up for a little bit longer. But that's literally how it started, was me calling and begging, or writing and begging to be able to use the space and photograph, just so I had a place to experiment, but also that I had a place to take photographs and start a conversation with just people that happen to be passing by, as a sort of an introduction to myself in how I would talk to strangers about decolonization, about the work that I wanted to do. Because at this point I hadn't really created anything. I was just experimenting. Then I moved a little further afield and started building a little bigger, and found relevant places. So I would contact places that I knew had a Métis connection and wanted to use those spaces, be able to use those spaces as an illustration of places that only tend to tell the story of the warriors or the people that fought there that were not First Nations or Métis, who were fighting alongside British soldiers, but we tend to talk only about the British soldiers. So places like this are a great place to start that conversation about decolonization. So they're the next group of people that I contacted, was people that I knew I would be able to speak to them and say, this is what I'm trying to do. I just need some help. And I want to just do this and take these photos, and it has some relation to my culture, my project, which is addressing decolonization in Canada. And most places were really great about saying, sure, you can come in and take some photographs. Then as things got going, I realized that I needed to make things that were more intricate. So I learned how to sew. So the work changed from being something that was just structural to something that was physically structural, that I had to make ahead of time so that I could make something bigger and make something that could last longer. But I also needed it to still be political, and still be pretty, right? So sometimes if I'm not there to talk about something, or there's not staff around or a didactic that's right there for someone to read, it's hard for them to understand what the project is about, or why there's just this red flower suspended from a tree and plunged into the ground. So these are other places. Oh, I'm sorry. So the left is Parliament Hill, the right hand, it's the Tom Thompson Gallery. So again, places where they let me make smaller installations and work on them, knowing I was working towards something larger but needed photographs. So I mean, they were really great, both security at Parliament Hill and the Tom Thompson Gallery, as far as letting me come to work there and having these pieces there for a month or something. Not the Parliament Hill, but the one at Tom Thompson, just to try to see whether or not this project would work, if it was viable. Then I got into the more of the heavy lifting. This is, I mean, this is what I really wanted to be able to do, was work in places like residential schools, or previous residential schools. This is actually an Anglican church. My family is from the Sioux, and this is Chingwa Residential School, the church that is adjacent to where the school was. And I contacted the survivors group. Well, I contacted the university first, and then I contacted the survivors group and asked whether or not I would be able to build an installation there and photograph it and take it down. So it was only there, it took me 2 days to build, but I was, you know, there the 2 days and photographed the 2 days and took time lapse in 2 days, so that I would have records of these things to be able to show other spaces. This is what I can do. I have done it. It's not still there, but this is what I'm capable of. And that's really part of the story, is learning myself what I was capable of doing. I knew it was a long-term project, right? So I've been working on this since July 23rd of 2021. I think that's right. 2020, sorry. So that's a long period of time, and I've done well over 100 installations at this point. Actually, it's 147. And it started small. And I think that sometimes as artists, we think we need to start big. We need to start at the sort of at the end game, as opposed to this sort of slow progression. Although, I mean, goodness, it all takes slow progression, doesn't it? We've all lived through that. So I found it was one step at a time. I just had to work slowly and methodically through a list, quite literally. So like I said, I started at the communities that I could get to quickly, which were close by. Then I moved a little further afield and a little further afield, and to things that were more poignant, in so much as talking about decolonization was concerned. Yeah. Then I reached out to different museums, not smaller, but different museums that were closer, again, to where I live. So this is Black Creek Pioneer Village in Toronto, and they have a template of Egerton Ryerson's, what he was thinking could be used as residential schools. They have that on site. And like I said, it is just a template, but it is there. So I asked if I could install there, and they allowed me to do that. And I was able to, in a day, install this. And actually, they asked that it could stay. So it did stay there. I had only intended on it being there for the day and then photographing it, but they did ask for it to stay. So it was up there for a couple of months. But then again, that's a poignant place to be able to take photos, build something that's important in a space that's important, write about it, think about it, talk about it. So although in a lot of these places I didn't necessarily get paid, I was building up something that I knew was much larger, and was willing to take that sort of financial hit on that to be able to build this sort of repertoire of photographs that I could say, again, this is what I'm capable of. I'm able to create these spaces and intervene into these spaces and change them into something else, and put this sort of spin on them that has more to do with decolonization than it does with just viewing this space as is, and not thinking about it in the grander scheme of how it fits into Canada. And then I reached out. I already had a relationship with Woodland Cultural Centre and the Mohawk Institute, which is in Brantford, Ontario. So I reached out to the curator there and then asked also if I could come to install there. I think this is one of the first ones where I was actually paid, and which was fabulous. And I'm incredibly appreciative of that, just like all of us are when we get paid, right? It's a hard thing for an artist because most times we don't get paid. So this was great. And they were wonderful and understood where I wanted to go with this. And it was a way for me to build an installation again. In the foreground, what you're seeing is the Mohawk Institute, and behind, if you were facing here, behind you is actually Woodland Cultural Centre, which is the Artist Centre. And yeah, there's this juxtaposition between these two spaces. One is old and one is new. And yet the tree that's here that you see has been here the entire time, which is why I wanted to be able to create there. So I reached out to them again privately and asked if I could install here. So part of the time I was applying en masse later on, but at the beginning I was applying to specific places or calling specific places or reaching out to specific people at specific places to say, this is my idea. I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. I'm not sure how to make this work. I'm hoping you can help me and let me use the space so that I can sort of sort this out in my own head. Anyways, so I mean, it was great that they let me do this, and yeah, and then onwards I went. This is another one that I booked before Woodland Cultural Centre, but another one where I did not get paid. But this was another incredibly important one to me to create, and this is on the Ontario Craft Council in Toronto. And to me, places like that were places where Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis art were used as a commodity, and yet the artists were not paid appropriately historically. So it was important in my mind for me to create in a space like this. And they were great about that. So they let me create in the 2 front windows. It took me, I don't know, 9 hours or something to create it. And then I photographed it and then took it down, which was heartbreaking, but necessary, right? It was a necessary thing to do, to go and create there, because it was part of a portfolio of photographs that were important. They weren't just photographs in the woods, which is fabulous and great. And I wanted those too, but I needed there to be photographs in places that had a social context. And that's what I did. And I was somewhat relentless, because I'm sure some of these people will attest to, in asking, I'm not charging you your windows. If there's a time your window is going to be empty, is there any chance I can use it? And I think it's just a matter of keep asking. So the other thing that was important to me was to make sure that I reuse supplies. As every artist that's listening to this knows, we don't have a great amount of supplies most of the time because we can't afford it, right? So I wanted to reuse the supplies for 2 reasons. One, because I needed to, but the second, because I felt it was the right thing to do if I'm going to be talking about decolonization. Capitalism is not part of an Indigenous worldview. And so just throwing out the yarn and starting again would be counterintuitive. And I think it would make the project less if I did. Also, all of the yarn stays with the project. So as it travels, it carries those stories across the country in my mind. And I realized that way back then, that as I was bringing that yarn home and taking it apart, that, at the end of the day, I was writing out what happened during that day. And still had that yarn, and realized that that was part of the story too, and actually wrote that into my artist statement, that like how important that part of it was. So these little things that we sort of don't pay attention to necessarily as artists as being important ended up being incredibly important to the curators that I ended up dealing with, because they understood where I was coming from, because it wasn't just this sort of like thing in my mind. I was actually writing out, this is the reason why I am reusing all this yarn. It's not just because like I have to, even though most of the time that is the case. Sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit there by mistake. Oh, maybe I didn't. Sorry, my bad. And then I reached out even further and applied to things that I never thought I would get. So the photograph that you see on the left is a series of international artists that exhibit in Quebec City in the summertime. And actually my work, that's it's 14 feet wide and 30 feet long times 2. That's half of the installation that you're seeing there. This goes down a hill in Place Royale, and at the bottom of the hill is the work by Ai Weiwei. So that was incredibly intimidating to me, but it was a great sort of jumping off point. That was last summer. It was a great jumping off point to be able to show the size of work that I could create. And that was one of the bigger works that I was able to create early on. Or not early on, but after the first sort of 8 or 9 months, that's when I got this particular contract. So don't be afraid to sort of reach beyond what you think you're able to do, because oddly enough, I was stunned when I got that contract. But again, it was that building of that portfolio to say, these are the places I've been, these are why they're relevant, these are why they're important, and this is why your space is important too, and gave them reasons why the space was important too. I'm not going to go into those reasons, but I had reasons, and I had a reason for most spaces. Later on, not as much, because I got too busy to do that, but for lots of places that I did have a specific reason, when I wrote my letter to them, my cover letter to them, and my artist statement, I told them why. I was upfront and told them what it was about that space that I wanted to talk about and to address. The space on the right is one of the campuses at St. Lawrence College, which is actually in Brockville, and it's one of the larger spaces that they allowed me to use the entire space, which was great. And I was able to reuse pieces that I had used at another installation, and I liked that as well, that I was able to promote that continuity. As the work across the country, I like being able to recognize the pieces within it, and if I'm recognizing it within my own photographs, I know other people are as well, and I think that's important. Another big thing was realizing that it's not just galleries that talk about art, that talk about decolonization, that talk about the relation between space and community, and buildings like this and community. The space on the left is actually Pier 21, which is in Halifax. I just completed this installation a couple of weeks ago. I got home, and not a space that someone would think about putting an installation, which is why I contacted them, because when I was in Halifax a couple of years ago, I realized the importance of this space, like the physical importance of this space, and realized its position in colonization is so poignant. And so they're one of the people that I probably annoyed incredibly, because I just sent them photographs to begin with, and then I sent them an artist statement, and then I followed up because to me, it was incredibly important. to talk to them, and they did talk to me, which was great. And I did an installation. It took a couple of years to work all the details out, but I just completed that installation, and it's wonderful. And I had a good argument for why it was important for it to be there. And I think we tend to look at our own work and say, this work is wonderful, this work has purpose, this work, it has a fluidity to it, it's socially conscious, it's, whatever the case may be. But then I realized I needed to make it relevant to the people that I was trying to speak to, which were those curators or those directors or the staff within this venue. Same with the museum on the right. Same sort of, now this is in Quebec, so we're talking about a different type, or not different type, different time and space in colonialism, but still a space I want to talk to. But it's hard or more difficult for me to get spaces in Quebec, and that's just started to happen, so that takes longer. So even though I've had lots of success in some provinces, it is harder in different provinces. So from the outside, people think that the project is successful across the board, but that's not true. It's harder in different places to get people to be on board with things that are difficult to talk about. And that's something we always have to think about too, I think, is who are we speaking to and how do we speak to them? And that's what I do every time I look at a space like Pier 21. I went online and found out about the people who are there, about its history, about, change in staffing or like things like that. Like, why are things moving in the direction they're moving? It was important, especially in places like this. It's not a small museum. This is a national museum. So for me to ply my wares to them, it was important that I tell them why it was important for them to have me there. And finally, I succeeded in that. It was as far as I'm concerned, it was quite a coup. The other thing that I like talking to museums about is the repatriation of artifacts. So although this is specific to my project as part of decolonization, I think part of the time that I wasn't successful with other projects that I wanted to work on was because I wasn't thinking about it deeply enough. And this time I was thinking about all the different parts of a museum, all the different parts of a gallery, and how they related to my work, how they related to the message that I was trying to send about decolonization, the conversation I was trying to have with staff, the conversation I was trying to have with people who frequent the gallery or the museum, the people who come in to clean the carpets in the museum. I wanted to talk to everyone that was coming in and out of that space. So I needed to look at all of the parts of these spaces, which I'd never done before. I was only directing my work at curators and at the people who were coming in the door. And that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And I realize that now, as I look back on it, what I was missing. One of the most important things that I think that I missed in previous bodies of work that is different from this body of work is that in this project, I'm talking about all of us, not just how I'm feeling about something. I'm not talking about how you're feeling about something. I'm not talking about how Kathy's feeling about something. I'm talking about how we're feeling about something. And I think that makes a huge difference. I think it makes a difference when we're looking at things from a collective point of view. Maybe that's because I'm so far off the left, I've fallen off. I'm not sure. But I cared about how my parents would feel about it. I cared about how my siblings felt about it. I cared about how my children would feel about it. And I cared about how my children's children felt about it. And that is the reason why in this specific installation, this is when I really started understanding my own work. I made the shadows purposefully. I wanted them to be present because those are all those people I just named. We are the ones that are in the present. Those are those red circles. The ones that are coming behind us, the ones that have come before us are the ones that are the shadows. And that is when everything about my work changed, and everything about how I feel about myself and about my project changed. And I think that I presented it differently at that point. And I think maybe that's how every artist gets to this point. I'm not really sure, but to me, it was a complete change in how I felt about the project. So, sorry. So Richmond Art Gallery, bottom left-hand corner. If you will notice that these pieces are at a lot of 2 other spaces. That's important. The continuity is important. And I've realized that as I've progressed in my career, is as tiny little bit as I've gotten in my career, that the continuity is a big deal. I didn't know that before. I certainly know it now. The pieces that you see in the top left-hand corner, also both of those pieces you will have seen in Quebec in that installation that you saw suspended in Place Royale. Pieces on the right-hand side, all those circles, you saw those before too. You saw them in Quebec City. So that's important because I can physically illustrate that the work is traveling the country. The top left-hand corner is in Milton, Ontario. The bottom is, of course, Richmond. The right-hand side is the Artist Project in Toronto. So at different times, they're in different places, but they're presented differently, but it's the same work. I just build more and more and they get bigger and bigger as I go across the country. Okay, so the top left-hand one is one of the, I just wanted to show you one of the weavings that are hanging in Pier 21. There's 19 27-inch weavings. This is the smallest weaving of them. The reason I'm pointing it out is because each time I move a weaving to a different location, I add circles around that center. And the reason I do that is because just like a tree ring, each time, okay, so a tree ring, the dark lines are during the winter time and the light ones are during the summertime. So that when I add to a weaving, that's the same thing. I'm adding time, I'm adding people, I'm adding a space, right? So I wanted to show you that because to me, that's incredibly important in this work. And again, you'll see bottom left-hand corner is Granville Island. This is up currently as well. And the work that you see on there, you will have seen in several other of the photographs, both the circles and the weaving portion that is the bottom part of the tree in a lot of different places. The yarn on the left-hand or the right-hand side is the yarn that you saw in that second or third photograph that were in balls that I undid when I took it to make another installation. There it is. So it's being able to prove that as I go along is, I think, incredibly important. So, and there it is again. This is last winter at a provincial park. This is one of those ones where it's a clandestine one. I didn't ask to go to this one, but some of them, you know what, sometimes you just got to do some things. And again, a lot of places haven't asked me to work in the wintertime, which is unfortunate because in the winter, I think these are quite lovely and important. And certainly when thinking about the things like the fur trade, I would like to be able to make some in the wintertime outside, but you know, here we are. So the last couple of things I want to say is that as far as funding is concerned, our provinces are quite different. The Canada Council for the Arts, when I did get funding for this, and I think what it was that tipped the scales for me was the continuity, was being able to say, this is how it's going across the country. This is why it's important across the country. This is why I applied for a travel grant. This is why these places are important. Actually, Richmond was one of the places that I applied for funding for. So why are these places important? And then I listed them. And I still only got a third of the funding, but it was a third more than I had, right? So at the beginning, I didn't expect any money for it. I just, asked friends if they had any red yarn, literally. And I think every artist knows that's how funding happens when you're starting out or when you're starting a new project. But I hope you understand how I marketed the work as it grows across the country. And as far as the funding, I was able at some point to say, I need to ask for CARFAC funding. I don't ask all places for all funding. I ask for what they can help with. Some places can help with a lot. Some places can barely pay me at all. But they've got a hotel room because, their aunt cleans there and somebody got me a hotel room, literally, because the gallery or the museum's so small, but they're at a reservation. They're next to two reservations, and they wanted to do something that was respectful to their community. So hell yeah, I'm going, right? So no matter what, I'm going. And that's important too, sometimes, is that I'm not prideful about it. I care about the work. I don't care about me, which is why my photograph is not on any of the advertisement for the work. It's not on place cards for the work. It's not on it. It's a picture of my hand with the yarn. So that's what's important, is me doing the work, which is me with the yarn around my hand. It isn't about me. It's about stopping this and about decolonization. And I mean it. I think maybe that's the difference too, is that this isn't a part-time thing for me. This isn't a passing fancy. This is like literally my whole life right now. So yeah, well, for the next couple of years. Yeah. So yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of questions just from listening to you talk, but just jumping off your last statement, one of the first questions we received very early on in your presentation from Dorothy would like to know how you view decolonization, as the word seems to have a few different meanings or different ways of looking at the issue. And I would imagine that would also depend on where you are in the country, or which country, whether you're in Canada and whether you're in the US. So maybe you wanted to just share that with us on how you view sort of that definition of decolonization.
Definition of decolonization. But to me, it's the tearing down of an institution that habitually told one story and only one story. Not my story, not your story, just one story. And it tended not to be female, and it tended not to be any color but white. So I think that's a big part of it, is to say there is more than one story. And it's not just that there's an additional Indigenous story. There's lots of stories. There's newcomer stories. There's LGBTQ plus stories. There's tons of stories, and we have to stop telling just one. That's one part of decolonization. The other part is to say, is to concede that there were people here before, right? And that they were displaced along the way. And let's talk about that. And let's, you can only sweep things under the rug so long before you can't walk on it anymore, right? So, and it's the same, those round circles we were looking at, no matter what, we're still those round circles. So I think decolonization is realizing that we can't be a tight weaving. We can't have a tight weaving if we take too many of those strings out. So to me, is how do we weave those strings back together? And decolonization is part of that. We tear it all down and we put it back together again. We weave it back together again. I hope that makes sense.
Right. Yes, thank you. No, that was very
It is
clear.
how my brain works it. Yeah.
Very succinct, great for such a large topic. And I just want to remind people out there, please, if you did have any questions for Tracey-Mae, just you can put those in the Q&A box or the chat, and I will help monitor that. Meanwhile, I do have some questions of my own. One is about your process of documentation, because documentation is such a huge part of the work.
Yeah.
Did you have a background in photography? Did you hire a photographer? Like, especially when you
I
first
didn't
started.
sew. No, I did nothing. I did not sew. I knew that I knew one stitch, I knew a single crochet stitch, which is a really boring blanket, by the way. So yeah, so I had to learn all of those things. Then I had to learn how to knit. That didn't work. So I don't, you'll notice there's not a lot of knitting. I did buy a knitting machine, but, and holy crap, man, I can't knit. Then I learned how to weave. So that was part of that process, but the documentation part of it, no. I had to learn, I had to buy a camera. That was a big deal. Holy shit, that was a big deal. But we found one, we waited till New Year's, my husband and we found the one that was on sale. That was an older model Canon Nikon. And yeah, it was like a big thing. He researched it, we figured it out. I still am not great at using all the settings. I don't understand most of them, but I really, so that was a big part of it. Writing was a big part of it. I think as an artist, I learned that writing was a huge part of art that I didn't know. I didn't know that. I didn't know that till this project. I've learned so much about art and everything else through this project. It's insane the amount that I've learned in such a short period of time that I did not know before. And writing was a big part of it. Yeah. So no, I didn't know anything. Nothing. I knew nothing. Now I know a little tiny bit.
Right. But the early photos look great. I mean, you have that consistent, use of light and the whether you're inside or outside. So I think you've done a great job with that, because
that's luck. That's
such a big role luck in your artwork, though, like that documentation. And I'm sure is what helps you continue in terms of getting more funding, or just showing, look at what I can do. It is so important. So you've done a great job.
And the time lapse is a good idea too, because the time lapse, I saw something stupid on Instagram or something like that, like completely unrelated. And they had it in a time lapse video. And I was like, oh crap. And originally I did it so that I could point out where I could make things go faster in my work, because it was taking me so long. And that was building things ahead of time. So the documentation actually helped me figure out how to make things better. I don't know how to make that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that literally is how it worked. Yeah.
Well, that was something I wondered, because you haven't been to a lot of these places beforehand. And actually, I noticed the question from Susan very similar to what I was thinking. Do you have an idea of what the pieces will look like prior to arriving, or do you build it in response to the space?
So at this point, at the beginning, when I was doing them close by, I would just take some yarn and hope for the best, because I really didn't know what I was doing. But later on, when it was further afield, I can't go and do site. Like I can't fly to Richmond to look at the site and then come back. So I would have places send me photos. I would devise whether or not I could build something or what I could build. Sometimes I have to draw it out. It depends on the space. Like sometimes, like some spaces I really do, like the Governor General's, when I just finished the Governor General's, I had to actually draw that out for them, because it's like the RCMP after, like it's a whole thing. So it's, yes, for some places I have to really actually know what I'm going to build. A lot of places I'm flying by the seat of my pants. And that's not true. But I mean, I've built the pieces, but sometimes I get there and people think that something's steel and I bring magnets, and it's not, it's aluminum. And then I am like, okay, well, now I got to do something else. So I am reacting to the site no matter what, because nothing ever really works the way it's supposed to.
Right,
So,
of course, yeah.
Not 100%. So
yeah. Great. And so we have a longer question from Kate. Do you have any thoughts on how to foster genuine connections with those spaces where you can trust that if they can't pay Carfax fees, they are providing what they can as direct funding or support as an honest exchange, and not as a means of cheap labor? cheap labor or an
No.
easy way to improve the public perception? And how do we look for those places where we can trust and foster that in our relationships with these places?
Bloody hell. Well, that's a pretty big question. Okay,
Mhm.
so literally, you'll know because but these aren't galleries, right? These are museums that I'm talking about. And these are tiny little community museums in some places that are not like have no industry anymore. And these are very small communities up north. Like they're nowhere near a city center. They're nowhere near anything. So no, they can't lie to me and say they have money when they don't, because they literally don't. You know. So and then some of the larger places, I've never, like, I mean, I don't ever ask for travel, and I don't ever ask, like, I mean, it's always sort of a break even kind of thing with me. I I have a different view of this project. I don't look at it, I don't make a wage. Like, it's not like I that's not a thing. Like, I don't, yeah, so yes, I make Carfax rates, but the travel and stuff, that's all taken out of that. So
Well, how long
but
would you say it takes for you to kind of, by the time you contact a place, and I'm assuming you have some conversations or
yep.
emails or whatever, like how long is that
Yep.
process in terms of building that relationship?
Oh,
Generally.
it takes time. Yeah, like I mean, 2 years for places like Pier 21, 2 years for the Governor General. Now think that a lot of that has to do, not a lot, but some of that may have to do with COVID, right? Although, yeah, but you guys, I mean, that's still months, right? So it still takes time to establish that relationship. It's that's just part of how the arts works, right? It's just how museums work. It's a conversation that's a prolonged conversation as all the ducks get in a row. So for small places, there's very few ducks. So I don't, yeah, I don't worry about those ducks. And you know what? If somebody screws me over, I'm learning a lesson, but it hasn't happened yet. And when it does, I'll learn the lesson. But that day is not today, right? So and I'll get to that place when I get to that place. But I'm never going to say no to a space that doesn't have enough money for me to come to work in. Not for this project. There's no way. I just won't.
Right.
I know.
In terms of the spaces, like, are you, because you say you're like, you know, like how, like, I'm trying to think, like, if some of your ones are only up for like a day and then they're gone, but others that maybe are up
Not
for a longer
anymore.
time.
No.
Do you do other, like, do you do programs? Do you do just a talk, or is it,
Yeah.
what else, other things would you do with that
No.
institution?
No. At this point, none of them are up, just up and come down. They're all up for a minimum of 3 months. The short-term ones were only at the beginning for photography. As far as programming and stuff, no, I don't do any of that stuff because there just isn't enough time between the physicality of making the work and then the travel and then putting the work up. No, I can't. Like, yes, I'll do things like this, and I'll do artist talks, or I'll do a lecture or whatever. But as far as like, I'm thinking you're meaning teaching or anything like that, right?
Or just any, if you're, I'm thinking even just having discussions with staff or with visitors that might come in, like if you're,
Oh yeah,
that,
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
how,
yeah.
I guess, how do you plan that sort of thing? Or is that something you would work with on the staff? Say, I want to do, this, or I want to be in the museum or gallery for this amount of time to talk to people, or.
Right, yeah. And I try to always, actually, I just had a very first gallery at a university tell me no, that they wouldn't let the public in, which was like, what? Like, I'd never encountered that before. So we're going to have a discussion about that because that weirds me out. That's the first time. I've never not had people in. It's weird. I think it's weird. Hope they're not watching. because it's weird. Like that's never happened before. There's usually
Mhm.
people around, right? It's
Yes,
a
yeah.
public space. So yeah, no, and staff, it depends on the venue because lots of venues will have me in like for a breakfast beforehand. They'll say, hey, come an hour
Mhm.
early. Everybody's going to be here. We're going to have a little chat, like talk to us about what's going to happen during the day. And then what, you're taking the project or answer some questions. Cool. So yes, that happens as well. Um, yeah, I don't really know what I'm going to do about that no people around thing because that's weird, right? And there are
Mhm.
times where it's like a really big installation and I'm up a 12-foot ladder and I don't really want to have to talk to anybody because I'm up a
Right.
12-foot ladder.
Mhm.
Um, but most spaces I'm right beside people who are right in the museum. So,
Right.
right, or right outside the
Mhm.
museum. That's fabulous
Mhm.
because who better to talk to than the people who are coming to the museum?
Mhm. Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Or the gallery. Yeah, I like that part of it. I really do. I mean, there's been some times where I haven't liked to talk to people because they're
Yeah.
horrible, but
I think
and
most
I'm not
public
joking.
artists can agree and understand that, who've
Oh
had to
my
make work in
gosh,
the
yeah.
public. Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder, didn't your mother ever say if you didn't have something nice to say to, apparently not. But that's okay. It has only happened a couple of times, so it's not like
Mhm.
it's, but they're really good jokes, so it's fine. It's all good.
And we have another question from Tanya, who's asking, how do we apply for funding for social issues like dismantling colonial systems of power, for example, policing, or I would say any sort of difficult topic? Like
Yeah.
how would you suggest approaching that for funding?
I think I approached it really passionately, but not uh I don't know another word for like frou-frou. I like help me out there. Like I'm fairly clinical. So but it was like incredibly passionate because I am incredibly passionate about this. So I think you have to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth in these applications. Honest to gosh, if that's the way you feel, you have to say the way you feel about it and be open about it and honest about it. Um, in my mind anyways, and I think that worked for me because I
Mhm.
was, yeah, and I didn't waste their time with a whole lot of flower,
Yeah.
flowery stuff. That's not in my nature. But I showed how hurt I was and I told how hurt I was and how I felt about it. And yeah, absolutely. And I think I was fairly raw in a lot of it. So
Mhm. But I think that makes sense when, from every funder I've spoken to or people that get a lot of funding and grants, the simpler the better. The more clear you can
yeah,
be,
yeah,
the more direct you can be, um,
yeah.
because they don't know you and they're just reading
No,
this for the first time, and it has to be very
yeah,
simple and very clear. And
yeah.
just getting back to that one question too, I'm assuming we're talking here Canada Council, your provincial arts council. Were there any other places that you had applied for funding?
Um, no, because I couldn't find anywhere else. Like this
Right.
is not, yeah, public art and installation work is not well funded. Like it's not yeah, it's a harder sell. So if anyone there is working with something else, other kinds of art, I mean, it's the same premise. It's the same thing about saying why you're passionate about it, not
Mhm.
just because you like to paint, right? Like there
Yeah.
has to be something more than that, I think. Um, and that's just my opinion. I don't want to piss anybody off, but it is just my opinion. But uh, uh, I don't know if it's just that point in my life where every little thing that I do at this point has to have purpose, or I don't know what I'm doing with myself. So,
Right. Well, I,
quite
I think
literally.
the other great advice I heard in your talk was really researching each place so you can really target them and
Yeah,
understanding like
exactly.
what they are, what they do, or who the staff is, or something as simple
Yep.
as knowing who the staff is and whether there's been high turnover or there's been long-term staff like that.
Yeah.
That's such a smart way to go about it because it
Right.
shows you're not just randomly choosing places. Like there
Right.
actually
Yeah.
is thought and foresight into choosing
Yes.
places. And I think that
Yeah.
makes for a stronger application, whether it's for funding, whether it's for getting an
Yeah.
exhibition, you know, for all artists out there, like I think that just really shows whoever's reading your submission.
Yeah. I think there's something else too. I think it's also, remember at the beginning I said it's not just about you, it's not about just about me, it's about all of us. I think that's the other thing too, is that it's an issue that everybody's thinking about, right? Or doesn't know how to feel about, or doesn't know how to talk about, or whatever. I think all of us are feeling that, and that's another way to, when you're talking about your work, is to say, why should you give a shit about this? Right? Why should you care about it? So I think that could be part of it too. Whereas I was actually saying, this is why you should care about this.
Yeah. But
right?
that I think
In
helps
that
with the
tone of voice.
clarity. Yeah, like, but that helps with the clarity of your statement and the clarity of your writing. Like, it really does.
And I think my last line in my art statement is, if not now, when? If you don't care now, when will you care? Right? Like, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a smart approach, and I think that's what's helped you sort of been able to travel this and be able to go to so many different places, you know, because it is an important issue. It's obviously something you really care about, but I think a lot of other people care about it as well.
Yes.
Or are uncertain and not really sure what to do. And you provide them that, oh, this is a simple thing that we can do that will hopefully open up discussion.
Exactly. And that's all my job is, right? Because my job isn't to decolonize the space. My job is to start the conversation. It's the museum's gallery, or I'm sorry, it's the museum or the gallery space job to decolonize, not mine. But it's my job, I feel, to say, hey, it's okay to ask me this. It's okay to talk about this. We can talk about this, right? And we can be respectful to one another and non-confrontational, which is, I'm all about that. So like, let's do that. Let's do that. That, right?
Yeah. Well, we have another question that I'm going to add on to. Esme is asking how long your installations are up for. And I know you did say for 3 months, but I'm also curious, how many do you think you will keep doing? I know you're sort of leading towards a book and maybe a larger exhibition, but like, what's in your mind right now? And of course this could change. What is sort of the end goal in terms of how many of these installations, and how long would you like them to be up for ideally?
Be honest, well, I don't think I'm going to do the American tour. That's I'm not going to do that. I have another project that is pretty important to me right now that I'd like to work on. So I think I'll finish Canada, which is still going to take me probably another year and a half. But I'll start to work on this other project sort of in the interim and work towards that, because I care about both these projects, but the other project is even more personal, and so I need to address it. So I'm sorry. I gotta work towards this other project. So so I will do this until it's done, because I would never renege on my commitments. But the other project is pretty close to my heart, and I need to deal with that.
Of course. I have another question just about, because you did mention continuity in your work, and both as a way to promote it and to share it with others. But that is rarely something you can find in a new piece of work, because it's new to you, and as you're making it.
Of course.
So how long did that, you know, take to kind of get to that? Oh, okay, this is the thing, you know, this is it. I found it, to get that continuing thread, as we shall say.
Literally the thread, but right, it was the color. It's that. It was, so really, only for this project, that would be the simplest thing, was that the continuity was the color, not the structure, not the shape, not the space it was in, not the way it looked, not anything. It's the color. But now people are recognizing it not because it's red, because there are other colors in it now. Purple for royalty, yellow because it's my son, was my son's and my favorite color. Orange in homage, paying homage to Truth and Reconciliation Day, or Orange Shirt Day, as people call it. You know, there are other colors in there, and there's not just one red now, which makes all the reds different. And I like that even better. So the continuity becomes, they recognize that the work is large and red. No, is like, but that is part of it. Let's be honest. But also they recognize it because of the intricacy in the weaving, the intricacy in the crochet, in the, you know, these massive sort of webs that I make that are actually crocheted. It's like I never freaking stop sewing, and I don't even like sewing. Right? So
Yeah.
I never stopped crocheting right up until I was talking to you. I was crocheting. We were watching TV and I was crocheting. Before I talked to you the last time, I was crocheting.
Yeah, I remember
right?
you saying that you were sitting outside crocheting as you were getting ready for the install.
Yeah, like it's never stops because I can't stop. And the next body of work will also be based, like will be fiber based. I'm just hoping there's less sewing. That's all. And I have calluses. Who that was a thing? But I mean, a thing for sewing, but apparently it is. So
yes, it's those repetitive actions that will get you. I've met a few textile artists.
Who knew? It's insane. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah. So I don't
Agreed.
see any further questions, and we've kind of gone a bit over time, but I just
I'm sorry.
It's okay, because I enjoyed talking to you, Tracey-Mae. It was great to talk to you and learn more about your work. And I, wish that you get to show this in many more places and expand on it. Or if, it somehow bleeds into your next body of work as well, and it just kind of keeps building for you. But thank you so much for sharing and for, sharing.
Thank you.
Sharing with artists, because we all love to hear how other artists work and how they make it work. And you're definitely
thank you.
Doing a great job, especially if you're that busy and you're getting calluses.
Thank you.
I think that means you're doing something right.
Thank you. And anybody who wants to reach out, that I'm more than welcome to talk or to answer questions if I can. If I can help, I will. So certainly to other artists. So if I can help you, I will.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you for your generosity.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We're seeing your hearts and thank yous in the audience.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And we'll
bye, guys.
Have a good summer and see you soon.
Okay.
All right. Good
night, everyone.